What would you do if an 18-year-old stepped out of a lime green Lamborghini, laughed at the people he hurt, and walked into court certain he could buy his way out before lunch? Drop a comment telling us whether you think money makes some people feel untouchable. Because by the end of this story, the same teenager who arrived grinning for the cameras would hear Judge Caprio say 7 words that froze an entire courtroom in place. Hit that subscribe button if you believe truth has a way of catching up. And like this video if you think justice means more than paying a fine. It was 9:14 on a gray Thursday morning, April 16, 2026, outside the Providence Municipal Court on Dorrance Street. The kind of cold spring day where the wind cut straight through a blazer and made the courthouse flags snap hard against their poles. Commuters hurried past with coffee cups. Reporters were not supposed to be there. Nobody expected a spectacle. This was traffic and misdemeanor morning, not a murder trial. Then the Lamborghini turned the corner. You could hear it before you saw it. A savage, metallic snarl. The kind of engine note that makes people look up even when they do not want to. A 2024 Lamborghini Huracan Technica inverted scandal, bright enough to look radioactive under the pale sky. The car rolled up slow, almost theatrical, as if the driver wanted every neck on the sidewalk to turn. He stopped half over the painted loading zone, revved once, and killed the engine like he was ending a performance. Share this with someone who needs to see what happened next, because the entrance alone told the whole story before a single word was spoken. Out stepped Mason Whitmore, 18 years old, 6'1", sharp jaw, hair cut in that expensive, careless way that only looks effortless because somebody charges $200 to make it look that way. Black Amiri jeans, white Dior B22 sneakers, gold Rolex date just peeking from under the sleeve of a camel cashmere overcoat. He looked less like a kid coming to court and more like a luxury brand campaign built in a laboratory to annoy ordinary people. And he knew it. He took off his sunglasses slowly, scanned the courthouse steps, and smirked when 2 college students whispered to each other. One of his friends, Blake Mercer, climbed out of the passenger side with a phone already up, pretending he was not recording. Mason adjusted his cuffs, tossed his keys to the valet from the private lot across the street, and said, loud enough for everybody nearby to hear, "Let's get this over with. I've got brunch at 11:49. That one line spread across the sidewalk like gasoline. A woman standing near the entrance tightened her mouth so hard her chin shook. An older man in work boots muttered, "That kid has no idea where he is." A sheriff's deputy at the metal detector glanced up and stared for half a second too long. Even before the first file was opened, people were already angry. What Mason did not know was that 2 of the people entering the courthouse behind him had lived with the consequences of his little brunch delay every day for the last 5 weeks. The first was Gabriella Soto, 24, a nursing assistant from Cranston. Everybody called her Gabby. She wore a navy coat over light blue scrubs because she had come straight from the overnight shift at Rhode Island Hospital. Her dark hair was pulled into a tired bun. A soft brace wrapped her right wrist. She held a folder against her chest with both hands, careful, almost protective, the way people do when pain has taught them to measure every movement. The second was Omar Haddad, 38, a delivery driver from Pawtucket. Broad-shouldered, quiet face, left arm still in a sling beneath his jacket. He walked with the stiff caution of someone whose body had not forgotten the impact yet. Beside him was his sister Nura, carrying a manila envelope stuffed with medical bills, repair estimates, and payroll records. Neither of them said a word when Mason strutted past. They just watched. And in that moment, if you had been standing there, you would have felt it. Not tension. Not yet. Something heavier. The feeling that this was not going to be a simple speeding ticket hearing. The feeling that everyone in the building was about to witness a collision far bigger than the one that happened on Atwell's Avenue. Inside Courtroom 3, the air smelled faintly of old paper, floor polish, and damp wool coats. The benches were filled with the usual Thursday mix, drivers contesting citations, relatives waiting on minor hearings, public defenders flipping through folders, a couple of law students in the back whispering about procedure. At the front sat clerk Nancy DeLuca, organized as a metronome, silver-framed glasses low on her nose. To her left stood bailiff Reggie Collins, a former Marine with shoulders like a refrigerator and a face that rarely moved unless it had to. At 9:27, the side door opened and Judge Frank Caprio stepped in. He was smaller than Mason's ego and larger than the room. There are people who command attention by volume and there are people who command it by stillness. Judge Caprio belonged to the second kind. Dark robe, calm face, reading glasses in hand, no wasted motion, no need to perform. When he sat down, the whole courtroom seemed to settle around him like gravity had shifted. Case after case moved quickly. Improper turn, registration lapse, expired inspection sticker. Then Nancy called, City of Providence versus Mason Garrett Whitmore, case number TR 26417, reckless driving, failure to yield to a pedestrian in a marked crosswalk, leaving the scene of property damage, and motion regarding violation of pretrial conditions. That last part made several heads lift. Mason rose with his attorney, Brent Hollowell, a polished defense lawyer in a navy suit with a silk tie and the careful patience of a man billing by the hour. Brent leaned in and whispered something. Mason nodded without looking at him. He still carried the same amused expression he had worn outside, the one that said he believed the courthouse was a minor inconvenience scheduled between better things. Judge Caprio looked over the file, then up at Mason. "Mr. Whitmore," he said, voice even, almost gentle, "you came here on what began as a traffic matter. I need you to understand that it is no longer only a traffic matter." Mason gave the tiniest shrug. "Yes, Your Honor." Not respectful, just technically correct. Judge Caprio glanced at the attorney. "Counselor, does your client wish to admit, deny, or explain?" Brent stepped forward smoothly. "Your Honor, Mr. Whitmore intends to deny the more serious characterization of the incident. He acknowledges a lapse in judgment while driving, but we dispute the claim that he knowingly left the scene and strongly dispute any alleged violation of pretrial conditions." Gabby's jaw tightened. Omar stared straight ahead. Judge Caprio folded his hands. "All right, then we will hear it carefully. Before I tell you what the city had brought into that courtroom, drop a comment telling us whether you think Mason still believed this was just a rich kid problem with a rich kid solution." The prosecutor that morning was Assistant City Solicitor Dana Callahan, 33, measured voice, no theatrics. She did not grandstand. She did not need to. She carried a slim tablet, a stack of exhibits, and the kind of confidence people get when facts are heavy enough to do the talking. "Your Honor," Dana began, "on the night of March 11, 2026, at approximately 11:42 p.m., the defendant accelerated eastbound on Atwells Avenue near the intersection of Dean Street. Evidence will show that he attempted a high-speed pass in a congested corridor, swerved around a turning delivery van, mounted the edge of a marked crosswalk, struck two electric scooters, damaged the front of a parked floral van, and drove approximately 160 yards before stopping. Evidence will further show that rather than render aid, he exited the vehicle, inspected damage to his own front wheel, and attempted to leave until Providence police arrived." Brent lifted a hand. "We object to the phrasing 'attempted to leave.'" Judge Caprio did not even blink. "The court will decide what the evidence shows. Continue." Dana nodded. "The city will also present evidence that after release, the defendant contacted a witness indirectly and attempted to influence her statement." That was the first crack. Mason's expression changed, only a little, a flicker. His eyes cut toward Brent, then back to the bench. If you were watching closely, you caught it. It lasted less than a second, but it was there. Surprise, real surprise. Brent leaned in hard now, whispering again. Mason's jaw flexed. Judge Caprio noticed Of course he did. "Mr. Whitmore," he said, "is there something you did not expect to hear this morning?" "No, Your Honor." The lie sat in the room like a bad smell. Dana called the first witness, Officer Elena Martinez, badge 2147, Providence Police Traffic Unit. Martinez took the stand in crisp blue uniform, dark hair, and a tight bun, face composed. She spoke the way officers do when they have given the same facts enough times for emotion to stop altering the sequence but not enough times for them to stop caring. She described the dispatch. 2 scooters down. 1 vehicle partially blocking eastbound traffic. Driver argumentative. Civilian crowd gathering. "When I arrived," she said, "I observed a green Lamborghini with damage to the passenger side front bumper and rim. I observed 1 female later identified as Gabriela Soto seated on the curb holding her wrist, and 1 male later identified as Omar Haddad on the pavement near the floral van with pain in the left shoulder. I asked the defendant if anyone else had been in the vehicle. He stated there had been a passenger. I asked where the passenger was. He pointed across the street and said, 'He did. And want to deal with this.' Blake, sitting in the second row now, looked down at his shoes. Dana asked, 'What was the defendant's demeanor?' Martinez answered without heat, agitated, dismissive, concerned primarily with vehicle damage. 'Did he make any statements you found notable?' Brent stood, objection. Judge Caprio looked at him. 'On what grounds?' 'Prejudicial.' Dana replied, 'Your Honor, they are admissions by a party opponent.' 'Overruled,' said Caprio. 'The court will hear them.' Martinez turned slightly toward the judge. 'When I informed him that 2 people were injured and medical transport had been requested, the defendant said, "Nobody is dead, and this whole block is covered in cameras, so let's not pretend I'm some criminal." Then when I asked for proof of insurance, he said, "Do you know who my father is?" A rustle moved through the gallery. Not loud, more like a wave of disgust. Mason rolled his shoulders, as if the line was old news, maybe even defensible, but his ears had started turning red. Judge Caprio spoke softly. "Mr. Whitmore, a very small sentence can reveal a very large problem." Mason opened his mouth, then thought better of it. That was the first shareable line of the morning, and everyone in the room knew it. Dana then asked for the body camera footage. The monitor to the judge's right flickered to life. Grainy at first, streetlights, horns, blue strobes washing the storefronts in red and cobalt. Then the image stabilized, people in coats, a fallen scooter spinning 1 wheel slowly against the curb, someone crying. The sound of traffic diverted around the scene. The camera moved toward the Lamborghini, and there was Mason in a cream designer hoodie now stained at the cuff, pacing beside the car, phone in hand. "I barely touched them," he said on the footage. "Look at my rim, do you know what this costs?" You could feel the temperature in the room drop. Officer Martinez on the video said, "Sir, step away from the victims and stand by the curb." Mason laughed, actually laughed. On the bench, Judge Caprio watched without expression. That calm, if you have ever seen it, is more unnerving than anger, because anger tells you the judge is reacting. Calm tells you he is measuring. The footage continued, paramedics kneeling by Gabby, Omar grimacing as a medic palpated his shoulder, the officer asking Mason whether he had been racing another vehicle, Mason saying, "No comment." Then, with the body cam still rolling, Blake's voice from somewhere off frame, "Bro, stop talking." The gallery murmured again. Like this video, if you believe that one sentence told you everything about the kind of night this had really been. Brent rose for cross-examination and did what expensive defense lawyers do best. He narrowed. He softened edges. He suggested assumptions. "Officer, Atwell's Avenue is known for congestion, yes. It is possible my client was trying to avoid a vehicle encroaching into his lane. It is possible the scooters were positioned irregularly. It is possible that confusion, not indifference, explains his initial statements." Martinez did not flinch. "No, sir. The scooters were struck after your client accelerated. Confusion does not explain why his first concern was the price of his wheel." A few people in the back almost smiled. Then Dana called Gabby Soto. If Mason had expected a dramatic performance, he did not get one. What he got was worse: truth without decoration. Gabby walked to the stand carefully, sat down carefully, and placed both hands in her lap like she was trying not to burden anyone with the inconvenience of her pain. Her right wrist brace showed beneath the sleeve of her coat. Her eyes looked tired in the way only hospital workers' eyes do after too many overnight shifts and too little control over life. Dana asked her to describe the night. Gabby swallowed once. "I was leaving my second job. I work mornings at Rhode Island Hospital, and Wednesdays I pick up a late shift helping my cousin close his dessert cart on Federal Hill. Omar was nearby making a delivery. I had my scooter because my car transmission went last winter and I've been saving to fix it. The crosswalk signal changed. I started across. I heard the engine before I saw the car. It was loud, too loud for the distance. Then I remember the light, the green color, and then my hand hit the pavement." Her voice stayed level. That made it hurt more. "What injuries did you suffer?" Dana asked. "A fractured scaphoid in my right wrist, deep bruising on my hip, torn ligaments in my left knee. I missed 2 weeks from the hospital. I still can't lift patients safely with this hand for long, so I lost overtime." "And how has that affected you?" Gabby let out a breath through her nose. "I was supposed to start prerequisites for nursing school in May. I had the deposit. After rent and physical therapy, I used it." The courtroom went completely still. Even Mason looked at her then, really looked, perhaps for the furs. Tea time, not as a problem, not as a line item, as a person. It lasted only a moment before his face hardened again, but the crack had deepened. Dana asked if Gabby had any interaction with Mason after the crash. "Yes," she said. Brent shifted in place. Gabby continued. "While the ambulance was checking me, he walked over and said, 'Can we not make this a whole thing? I'll pay for your scooter.'" A woman in the gallery whispered, "Oh my God." Judge Caprio lifted his gaze to Mason. "Did you say that?" Brent answered before his client could. "Your Honor, we deny the phrasing." Gabby did not raise her voice. "You can deny the phrasing. You can't deny the face." That line hit the room like a hammer. It was the second quote everyone would remember. Dana then introduced Exhibit 6, photographs of Gabby's scooter folded under the floral van's bumper, the stem snapped clean through. Exhibit 7, the emergency department report. Exhibit 8, payroll records showing lost hours. Exhibit 9, the school deposit receipt dated February 28. Judge Caprio examined each one slowly. "Ms. Soto," he asked, "why did you come today?" Gabby looked at him, then down at her brace. "Because I needed him to see me standing up." Mason's jaw tightened so hard you could see the muscle flicker. And just when it seemed the hearing had already reached its emotional high point, Dana said, "The city calls Omar Haddad." Omar's testimony was shorter but in some ways harsher. He had been making his last delivery of the night to Bellissima Flowers, a small shop 3 doors down from where Gabby's cousin parked his dessert cart. He heard the Lamborghini accelerate. He turned. The floral van rocked from the impact. His shoulder hit the side mirror, then the pavement. His rotator cuff partially tore. He missed 23 workdays. Because he was paid by route completion and not salary, there was no easy cushion. He lost income. His sister missed work taking him to appointments. His daughter's 8th birthday party was canceled because the family could not justify the expense. Dana asked whether Mason said anything to him at the scene. Omar nodded once. "He told me, 'You people always come out of nowhere.'" The words sat in the air. Ugly, ambiguous. Worse because everybody could hear exactly what they sounded like without anyone needing to explain it. Brent objected again, overruled again. Judge Caprio looked at Mason for a long second. Language, he said quietly, is the fastest way to expose what a person thinks they are entitled to. That was quote number 3. And then came the first real twist. Dana asked permission to address the alleged pretrial violation. Brent objected, argued that the city was overreaching, said it belonged in a separate proceeding. Judge Caprio listened, then said, "If a witness was contacted after release, it goes directly to credibility and conditions. I will hear it." Dana called Tessa Holloway. Tessa was 21, a barista at a cafe on Dean Street. Blonde hair tucked behind one ear, black cardigan, nervous fingers. She had been waiting outside that night for a rideshare and had seen the Lamborghini surge past. Her original written statement, taken at the scene, said the car was flying and that the driver had room to stop but chose to squeeze through. Dana asked if she later changed that statement. Yes. Why? Tessa looked at the bench, then at the floor. Because 2 days later, a guy came into the cafe and asked if I was Tessa. He said he knew the family involved and that everybody wanted to avoid misunderstandings. He left an envelope with $2,000 cash and a note that said, "Be accurate. Speed is hard to judge at night." The entire courtroom made the same sound at once. Not a gasp, not exactly. More like the collective intake of a building realizing the story is worse than it thought. Brent shot to his feet. "Your Honor, unless the witness can directly tie this act to my client." Dana did not even wait. "We can." She held up a printed screenshot. "Exhibit 12, she said. Security footage from Holloway's cafe and metadata from an Instagram direct message request sent to Ms. Holloway at 8:13 p.m. the same evening from an account later traced to a device registered to Blake Mercer, the defendant's passenger. The message reads, 'Hey, Mason feels terrible. My guy can swing by your work with something for the trouble if your memory's fuzzy.'" Every eye in the room turned toward Blake. His face went colorless. Judge Caprio's voice became very soft. "Mr. Mercer, remain seated. You may wish to seek counsel." Mason whispered, "Blake." Blake did not look at him. And that was the moment the entire courtroom understood why the judge's first words had been so careful. He knew, even before the morning began, that this case was not about a spoiled teenager showing off his car. It was about what happens when arrogance collides with consequence and then tries to bribe truth into silence. If you believe accountability, why should never be sold, hit that subscribe button right now, because the next piece of evidence is the one that changed Mason's face for the first time. Judge Caprio recessed for 7 minutes so counsel could confer. People did not leave. Nobody wanted coffee. Nobody checked their phones for long. The air in the room had turned electric. You could hear whispers sliding down the benches like rain. Did he really think cash would fix it? His father probably taught him that. That poor girl. Wait till Caprio gets to sentencing. Even people with unrelated cases stayed seated. One man due on a registration matter actually asked the deputy if he could postpone his own hearing just so he could watch. That was the kind of morning it had become. The kind that people later described by saying, "You had to be there." When court resumed, Brent Hollowell looked different. Less polished, less in control. He asked for leniency in the handling of the witness contact allegation, insisting Mason had not personally delivered cash and had not fully appreciated the implications of indirect outreach. That phrase landed badly. Not fully appreciated, as if witness tampering were a vocabulary problem. Judge Caprio removed his glasses and set them down. "Counselor," he said, "there is a kind of privilege more dangerous than money. It is the privilege of believing consequences are for other people." Nobody moved. Mason stared at the bench. Quote number 4. Dana then asked to introduce surveillance footage from Bellissima Flowers and a neighboring pizzeria. Brent objected to timing, to chain, to duplication. Judge Caprio allowed it. The first clip showed Atwell's Avenue from above at 11:41:53 p.m. The street was wet from earlier rain, reflecting neon and headlights in blurred streaks of red and yellow. Pedestrians lingered under awnings. Delivery vehicles hugged the curb. Then the Lamborghini appeared from the west, low and bright and too fast for the shape of the road. It darted left around a dark sedan, cut back right, and when the floral van edged out a few inches from a parking space, Mason jerked the wheel. The right side mounted the painted border of the crosswalk. Gabby's scooter tipped. Omar spun. The floral van rocked. The Lamborghini stopped down the block. The second clip had no audio, but it showed what happened after. Mason got out. Blake got out. Mason bent immediately to inspect the passenger side front wheel. He kicked the tire. He threw both hands in the air, furious. Blake touched his arm and pointed back toward the crash. Mason looked over, saw paramedics kneeling, then shook his head and pulled out his phone. No matter what defense Brent planned, the video made it smaller. Judge Caprio asked for the footage to be replayed. He watched the moment Mason turned away from the injured victims 3 times. Then he asked the question nobody expected. Can the court zoom the defendant's phone screen? Dana exchanged a look with the technician. The resolution is limited, Your Honor, but we have enhanced stills. The still appeared on screen. Grainy, yes, but clear enough to make out a message thread. One incoming text at 11:44 p.m. Dad, do not say anything without Brent. Another at 11:45. Dad, call me now, don't admit fault. The courtroom reacted instantly. Mason's father, Garrett Whitmore, had been sitting in the back row all morning in a charcoal suit, silent and severe, the kind of man who looked like he had never waited in line for anything. Now every eye in the room found him. He did not flinch. He just crossed one leg over the other and stared ahead. Dana did not overplay it. She didn't need to. Your Honor, she said, the city is not suggesting a lawyer should not be consulted. We are suggesting the defendant's immediate priority, visible on video, was legal insulation rather than assistance to the injured. Garrett's attorney, who had not formally entered the matter, leaned toward him and whispered sharply. Garrett's face remained made of stone. For the first time all morning, Mason looked less smug than cornered. But the hearing was not finished stripping layers away. Dana called Dr. Leela Chen, orthopedic specialist, by affidavit summary accepted by stipulation. She outlined Gabby's treatment and the typical recovery period for a scaphoid fracture. Then Nura Haddad testified about Omar's missed routes and lost income. Then Bellissima Flowers owner Doreen Bell testified that the impact shattered a display cooler and damaged a refrigeration line, forcing her to dump nearly $900 in inventory before a wedding-heavy weekend. She did not cry, she did not accuse. She simply said, I run a shop where every stem matters. Losing those orders hurt. Layer by layer the harm became concrete, not abstract, not nobody died, real. A wrist, a shoulder, a school deposit, a child's birthday, a florist's inventory. A city block turned into somebody else's thrill ride. Judge Caprio turned to Mason. Do you wish to say anything before I hear argument on sanctions and conditions? Brent touched his client's sleeve, carefully. Mason stood. The room seemed to lean forward. With respect, Your Honor, he said, this is getting blown out of proportion. It was raining. The road was slick. I wasn't racing anyone. I didn't leave. I stopped. And I didn't tell anyone to bribe a witness. His voice was smooth, but not steady. He was still clinging to the version of reality that had protected him his whole life. If he spoke with enough confidence, the room would organize itself around his comfort. Judge Caprio let the silence breathe before asking, Mr. Whitmore, do you believe this hearing is unfair? Mason hesitated, then made the worst choice available to him. Yes. The silence that followed was enormous. Not because the word was loud, because it was revealing. Judge Caprio nodded once, then let us continue until it becomes clear. That line would later be quoted everywhere. Let us know in the comments if you saw the turning point right there, because what happened next was the moment Mason stopped controlling the story. Dana requested one final exhibit before argument, audio extracted from Blake Mercer's phone, recovered under warrant after he initially denied recording that night. Brent objected furiously, claimed prejudice, claimed surprise, claimed incompleteness. Judge Caprio overruled him after confirming prior notice had been filed with defense at 7:08 a.m. The clip was only 42 seconds long. It began with wind noise and sirens in the distance. Blake's camera was pointed low, at the wet pavement and the Lamborghini's front rim. Then Mason's voice came through, sharp, angry, unguarded. "Bro, I told you that van would move." Blake said, "You clipped those people." Mason answered, "Then delete this. My dad will kill me." Blake laughed nervously, "You need to chill." Then Mason said the sentence that emptied whatever sympathy remained in the room. "I'm not getting buried because some scooter girl chose the wrong second to cross." There are moments when a courtroom ceases to feel like a legal setting and starts to feel like moral weather. This was one of them. Gabby shut her eyes. Omar looked down. Nura covered her mouth. Somebody in the gallery actually whispered, "Monster." Brent put both hands on the table like he needed the wood to steady him. And Mason did something surprising. He did not deny the voice. He did not object. He did not look at his father. He looked at the screen as if hearing himself with other people in the room had changed the words. Judge Caprio spoke carefully. "Mr. Whitmore, there is a difference between making a mistake and revealing a belief. One is an event, the other is character." Quote number 5. Mason's throat moved, but no sound came out. Now Dana requested the court revoke release, citing witness contact and disregard for conditions. Brent argued for continued liberty, home supervision at most, saying the young man was 18, enrolled at St. Bartholomew Academy, had no prior record, and came from a stable family able to ensure compliance. That phrase also landed badly. Stable family. Because everyone had now seen Garrett Whitmore texting legal instructions on a zoomed surveillance still, while injured people sat on a curb. Judge Caprio looked toward the back row. "Mr. Garrett Whitmore, please stand." Garrett rose slowly. "Did you instruct your son not to admit fault before any effort had been made to determine whether the victims needed assistance?" Garrett's lawyer immediately objected, but Caprio held up a hand. "I am not asking for privileged strategy. I am asking about a father's priorities." Garrett's answer came cold. "I instructed my son not to make legal statements in a chaotic situation." Judge Caprio nodded once. "And did you instruct him to ask whether anyone was hurt?" Garrett said nothing. There it was. The answer everyone could hear in the silence. Like this video, if that silence said more than 1,000 excuses ever could. Mason sat down hard. His bravado was no longer intact. Something inside it had begun to crumble. You could see it in the way he kept rubbing his thumb against the edge of the defense table, again and again, like he had discovered texture for the first time. The camera of every phone in the gallery was forbidden, but if they had been allowed, clips from this exact moment would have gone viral before noon. Judge Caprio did not rush. He read a letter next. It was from Sister Angela Morty, guidance counselor at St. Bartholomew Academy, dated April 12. She described Mason as intelligent, charismatic, and frequently shielded from the natural consequences of his actions by adults eager to preserve the Whitmore name. She wrote that he had charm without discipline, resources without structure, and a loneliness he disguises as contempt. She concluded with a sentence that shifted the emotional temperature again. "If the court sees." Something worth saving in him. Please do not confuse accountability with abandonment. That line hit differently, because until then, Mason had been almost easy to hate. Now, for the first time, the possibility of damage behind the arrogance entered the room. Judge Caprio set the letter down. "Mr. Whitmore," he said, "who taught you that apologies can wait while lawyers get organized?" Mason looked at his father. The whole courtroom saw it. Garrett stared ahead. Mason swallowed. Then, for the first time that morning, his voice lost its sheen. "I don't know." Judge Caprio leaned back. "I think you do." That was the cliff edge, because everyone in the room could feel a deeper story pushing upward, and nobody knew yet whether Mason would keep lying or say the one thing that might finally matter. When proceedings resumed after another brief sidebar, the city introduced a sealed supplement regarding Mason's conduct while on release. Brent fought harder than ever to keep it out. He cited prejudice, youth, pending review. Judge Caprio read the first page in silence, then looked up at Mason in a way that made the back row sit straighter. "Mr. Whitmore," he said, "were you instructed not to drive while this matter was pending?" "Yes, Your Honor." "Did you drive anyway?" Mason stared at the table. Brent answered, "We are prepared to acknowledge a technical noncompliance, but—" Judge Caprio cut in, "I did not ask counsel." Mason's lips parted, closed, opened again. "Yes." Dana rose. On March 29, at 1:18 a.m., the defendant was observed on private residential security footage operating the same Lamborghini on Blackstone Boulevard. At 1:21 a.m., he is seen accelerating beside another vehicle. A patrol unit attempted to initiate contact. The defendant turned into the gated Whitmore residence before a stop occurred. That landed like another brick on a structure already failing. Brent tried to minimize it, said no citation was issued, said no stop was completed, said the footage did not establish dangerous speed beyond doubt, but the judge had heard what he needed. "Why did you drive?" Caprio asked. Mason said nothing. "Because you thought the rules still had not reached you." "Still nothing." Judge Caprio's voice remained calm. "Silence can be a confession when the alternatives are simple." Mason looked up then, anger flashing back to life. "You're making me into something I'm not." Caprio did not move. "No, Mr. Whitmore, your choices are doing that." That was quote number 6, and people in the gallery would repeat it in parking lots, over dinner tables, and in text messages all week. Dana then made a strategic decision. She asked to read a victim impact letter from someone not present in court, Marisol Pike, mother of 6-year-old Mila Pike, who had been inside Bellissima Flowers the night of the crash. Mila was not physically struck, but broken cooler glass had cut her cheek. 4 stitches. No lasting disfigurement, according to the report, but the child had begun covering her ears whenever she heard loud engines. The letter was handwritten. "I know people will say my daughter was lucky. She was. I am grateful every day it was only 4 stitches. But now every time a sports car goes by, she asks me if the loud man is coming back. She used to love city lights. Now she asks to park far away from windows." Nobody in the courtroom breathed quite right after that. Not even Mason. Especially not Mason. Because a grown victim can be argued with by a certain kind of person, a child's fear cannot. Before we reveal the one witness nobody expected to speak, drop a comment telling us what consequence you thought Mason deserved at this point. Brent asked for a private conference with his client. Granted, they moved to the side of the room. Garrett started to stand as if to join them. Mason looked at him once, then looked away. That was new. Garrett remained where he was. When Mason returned to the table, the posture had changed. He was still in designer clothes, still 18, still rich. But he no longer looked like someone waiting for inconvenience to pass. He looked like someone realizing that the version of himself he had been defending was collapsing in public. Judge Caprio noticed everything. He asked one question. "Mr. Whitmore, has anyone advised you this morning to tell the truth?" Mason blinked. Brent stiffened. Garrett's face hardened. Then from the second row, in a voice shaky but clear, a woman said, "I did." All heads turned. It was Rose Whitmore, Mason's grandmother. No one had noticed her come in during the recess. She was 74, small, silver-haired, wearing a lavender wool coat and sensible black shoes. She held a folded letter in trembling hands. Garrett's mother. The family resemblance to Mason lived in the eyes, not the wealth. Brent objected to the interruption. Judge Caprio raised a hand gently. "Ma'am, are you here on behalf of the defense?" Rose shook her head. "No, Your Honor, I'm here because my gra. Ndison stopped hearing honest people a long time ago." Even Garrett looked rattled now. Caprio asked if she had relevant information. Dana, to her credit, did not oppose. Brent looked like he wanted the floor to open beneath him. Rose took the stand. What followed changed the room in a different way. She did not excuse Mason. She did not deny the harm. She did not plead wealth, college prospects, youth, or family reputation. She told the truth with the exhaustion of someone who had been watching a slow-motion moral collapse for years. She said Mason had not always been like this, that at 12 he was funny, protective, inseparable from his older brother Colin, that when Colin died of an overdose at 21 after years of being quietly rescued from every consequence money could buy away, the family split in two. Garrett became colder, more controlling, more obsessed with image. Mason became reckless. "Not because he stopped feeling," Rose said, voice shaking, "but because in our house feeling anything looked like weakness." The courtroom listened like a church. Rose then looked directly at Mason. "You learned that if something breaks, you pay for it and call the problem solved. But people are not rims, Mason. They don't go back to factory condition." Gabby looked down and wiped one eye. Judge Caprio let the words settle. Rose continued, "I am not asking you to spare him. I'm asking you not to lie to him. If he leaves here thinking this was bad luck, we will bury another boy before 40. The sound in the room after that was silence, so total it felt like pressure in your ears. Mason's eyes were wet now, but he fought it. He hated that people could see it. You could tell. His hands were clasped too tightly. His neck had gone red. A person used to control does not fall apart gracefully. Judge Caprio spoke in that same steady tone. "Mrs. Whitmore, do you believe your grandson is dangerous?" Rose answered with devastating precision. "Right now, yes. Not because he wants to hurt people, because he thinks other people exist after his impulses." That line ended whatever remained of the morning's illusion. Schadenfreude had been easy. This was something more complicated. The judge turned to Mason again. "Do you understand why she said that?" Mason nodded once, barely. "Say it so I know you heard her." Mason swallowed. "Because I think I can undo things with money." "And can you?" His voice cracked. "No. First crack, public, irreversible. If you believe mercy only matters when truth comes first, hit subscribe." Because Mason was finally standing at the edge of the only honest sentence he had spoken all day. Dana rested. Brent, seeing the tide, attempted mitigation. He argued trauma, privilege without guidance, an immature brain, a family system that confused protection with denial. He offered immediate restitution, private treatment, voluntary suspension of Mason's license, monitoring, counseling, whatever the court wanted short of detention. It was not a bad argument. In another case, it might have worked better. Then Judge Caprio asked the question Brent feared most. "Mr. Whitmore, stand up." Mason stood. "Look at Ms. Soto. Look at Mr. Haddad. Look at that letter from the child you frightened, and answer this carefully. When you said, Some scooter girl chose the wrong second to cross. Were you angry, or were you telling the truth about how you see people when they inconvenience you? The room froze. Mason looked at Gabby. Really looked. Her brace, her tired eyes, the blue scrubs under the coat, the folder of receipts she should never have needed to carry. He looked at Omar's sling, at Nura's envelope, at the little pink sticker visible on Marisol Pike's letter, where Mila had probably pressed it with a child's hand. Then he looked at his grandmother. His father kept his face blank. And something in Mason broke. Not theatrically, not with a movie speech, worse, more real. His chest hitched once, then again. I was angry, he said first. Judge Caprio waited. Mason tried again. No, that's not all. He wiped his face hard with the heel of his hand, embarrassed by his own tears. I said it because that's how I was thinking, not just then, a lot, like people were obstacles, like if I had somewhere to be that mattered more, like if I paid for damage, then the damage didn't really count. Nobody moved. He kept going because once truth starts, it often spills. I did tell Blake to handle the witness. I didn't say bribe her, but I knew what it meant. I drove after I was told not to because I thought the rules were for people who get scared. I thought if I looked confident enough, this would become a story about overreaction instead of what I did. He took a breath that shook. And my dad told me not to admit fault. Garrett stood immediately. You will not put this on me. Judge Caprio's gavel cracked once, loud, final. Sit down, Mr. Whitmore. Garrett sat. Mason's breathing was uneven now. I'm not putting it on him. I'm saying I listened because it was easier. I liked the version where I stayed the victim. And there it was. The whole room knew it. The moment of realization. The line dividing arrogance from accountability. Judge Caprio's face softened, but only slightly. The truth, he said, does not erase harm. It simply stops you from multiplying it. Quote number 7. Then came the most unexpected turn of the entire hearing. Dana asked whether the victims wished to be heard on disposition. Omar said yes. He wanted restitution, license suspension, and something that makes him live like the people he almost ruined. Doreen Bell wanted reimbursement and community service. Marisol's letter requested that Mason hear from children who do not get to recover with money. And then Gabby Soto stood again. No one knew what she was about to say. She took a breath and spoke with the kind of courage that changes a room. I want consequences, she said. Real ones. I want him off the road. I want him to pay every bill. I want him to feel how small regular life can get when somebody else's recklessness lands on your body. She paused. Her voice tightened. But I don't want him destroyed. Mason looked up sharply. Gabby continued. Because if all we do is humiliate rich kids on camera, then they leave hating poor people more than they hate what they did. And I need him to understand people like me are not background characters in his story. So don't give him something he can brag about surviving. Give him something that forces him to see. Even Judge Caprio took a second before answering. That was the compassion twist. That was the mercy nobody expected. And it made the entire thing more powerful, not less. Like this video, if that kind of grace is harder than anger and stronger than revenge. Judge Caprio called a final recess before ruling. The courtroom exploded into whispers the second he left the bench. Law students scribbled frantically. A local reporter who had wandered in for another case sent 3 urgent texts and began drafting notes with both thumbs. Even the deputies looked at each other in that silent way professionals do when they know they are standing inside a story people will talk about for years. Mason sat alone at the defense table for most of the recess. Brent was conferring with Dana. Garrett remained in the back, arms folded, more statue than father. Rose held a tissue but did not go to Mason. Not yet. That told you something too. Because love is not always rescue. Sometimes love is letting consequence make contact. At 11:38 a.m., Judge Caprio returned. No one rustled, no one coughed, even the HVAC hum seemed to recede. He adjusted the file once and began. Mr. Whitmore, there are young people who enter this courtroom having made a mistake, and there are young people who enter this courtroom carrying a worldview that guarantees more mistakes unless something interrupts it. You are in the second category. Mason stood without being told. You did not merely drive recklessly. You revealed contempt. You treated injury as inconvenience, witnesses as problems to be managed, and the truth as a thing negotiable through influence. That is not a traffic violation. That is a moral emergency. The words hit like iron. However, Caprio continued, I have also heard today the first credible signs that you understand, at least dimly, what you have become. And because this court is not in the business of giving up on 18-year-olds unless it must, I am going to craft a sentence designed not for your comfort, but for your transformation. You could have heard a pin fall into a puddle. He then laid it out piece by piece. 90 days of home confinement under sheriff's supervision. Electronic monitoring. Immediate suspension of driving privileges for 1 year, subject to review. Full restitution to Gabby Soto, Omar Haddad, Bellissima Flowers, and the Pike family for counseling costs, medical expenses, lost wages, repairs, and property damage. 200 hours of community service, with no substitutions, to be completed at Rhode Island Hospital's Rehabilitation Support Program, and at a youth pedestrian safety initiative chosen by the city. Mandatory counseling. Mandatory participation in a restorative justice conference, if and only if the victims chose to attend. Sale of the Lamborghini within 30 days, with proceeds first applied to restitution. And then he added the piece no one saw coming. Because you violated release, because you contacted a witness through an intermediary, and because I do not trust you to walk out of this courtroom and suddenly become honest, you will be remanded to the custody of the sheriff for transport to your residence today, where the vehicle, all keys, and your travel documents will be surrendered under inventory before home confinement begins. Mason blinked. The room blinked with him. Judge Caprio looked directly at him and delivered the line that would make this moment unforg. Edible. You wanted to make an entrance in that car. Now you will go home in handcuffs and learn what dignity feels like when it is no longer decorative. For 1/2 second, the courtroom forgot how to breathe. Then the sound came. A sharp collective gasp. Somebody whispered, "Oh wow." A woman in the back started crying. Blake Mercer covered his face. Garrett surged to his feet. This is outrageous. The gavel came down again. No, Mr. Whitmore, said Caprio, eyes never leaving Garrett. What was outrageous happened on Atwell's Avenue. That was quote number 8. And it might have been the most powerful of the day. Bailiff Collins stepped forward, professional, controlled. No drama in his movements, which made the drama stronger. Mason Whitmore, he said quietly, turn around please. Mason did not move right away. His face had gone pale in a way expensive skincare cannot fix. The room could see the exact instant the abstract word custody became physical. He looked at his father. Garrett did not help him. He looked at Brent. Brent looked down. He looked at Rose. She held his gaze and gave one small nod. Not yes. Not no. Truth. Mason turned. The click of handcuffs in a silent courtroom is one of those sounds people never forget. Metal on metal, final, smaller than a gunshot, bigger than a shout. His shoulders dropped when the cuffs closed, not in defiance, in collapse. This was the justice-served moment everyone had been waiting for, but it did not feel triumphant in a simple way. It felt heavier, cleaner, sadder. Because once the cuffs went on, the designer clothes stopped mattering. The car stopped mattering. The last name stopped mattering. He was just a boy who had finally run out of places to hide. Share this with someone who still thinks privilege always wins, because that image changed everyone in the room. But the story was not over. As Bailiff Collins prepared to lead Mason away, Judge Caprio said, "One moment." Mason stopped. "Remove the young man's father from the courtroom if he speaks out of turn again," Caprio added. Garrett sat down, furious but silent. Then the judge addressed Mason one last time before transport. "Mr. Whitmore, listen carefully. Handcuffs are not your identity. They are a message. If you learn nothing, they will become prophecy. If you learn what this court is trying to teach you, they may one day become memory." Mason, still facing away, nodded once. His voice, when it came, was barely above a whisper. "Yes, Your Honor." "Turn back around." He did. Tears were visible now, no more hiding them. "Do you have anything to say to the people you harmed before you leave this courtroom?" Mason looked at Gabby first, then Omar, then the table where Marisol's letter sat. "I'm sorry would have been easy, cheap even." Instead he said, "I don't know how to apologize without sounding like the person I was this morning." He took a breath that shuddered. "But I was cruel before I was sorry, and you deserved better before I ever felt bad. I know that now." Gabby's eyes filled again. Omar gave the slightest nod. It was not forgiveness. It was acknowledgement. And then Mason was led out. The side door closed behind him. People exhaled all at once. If this had been a television script, that would have been the ending. The handcuffs, the gasp, the quote, cut to black. But real justice and real transformation do not happen in a single scene. They happen afterward, in the ugly, boring, humiliating days nobody films, in the mornings after the courtroom empties, in the routines that either change a person or prove they never meant a word. 3 hours later, sheriff's deputies escorted Mason into the Whitmore residence on Blackstone Boulevard, a sprawling limestone house with imported hedges, a circular drive, and windows so large they reflected the city like a possession. Neighbors watched from behind curtains. The same kid who had left for court in a Lamborghini came back in county transport, wrists cuffed, ankles not shackled but steps measured, shoulders no longer loose with entitlement. Deputies inventoried the car keys, garage fobs, passport, and every set of vehicle documents. The Lamborghini was photographed in the garage from 6 angles. Mason's phone was reviewed for restricted contact compliance. An ankle monitor was fitted before lunch. The family staff disappeared from view. No one wanted to be seen. Garrett attempted to argue with the deputies. Rose told him to stop. That might have been the first useful thing anyone had heard inside that house in years. The next morning at 6:15 a.m., Mason woke to a home confinement schedule so rigid it might as well have been military. Counseling appointments, restorative assignments, online coursework, daily check-ins, no unapproved guests, no leaving except for medical, counseling, court-approved service, or supervised meetings. The boy who measured life in invitations and engines was suddenly living by permission slips. And the worst part, why? Not the restriction. It was the quiet. No followers cheering, no friends laughing. Blake stopped texting after his own family retained counsel. The brunch crowd disappeared. The girls who had crowded his photos with fire emojis vanished into other people's weekends. A lot of people love charisma when it costs them nothing. Very few stay to watch accountability. Weeks passed. Then the real work began. Judge Caprio had required written reflections every 10 days, submitted through counsel and copied to the Restorative Justice Coordinator. He also required Mason to read every victim impact statement again before attending any service shift. At first, Mason wrote like someone trying to sound changed, too polished, too aware of his own language. The coordinator, Denise Rowlands, sent the first reflection back with one sentence in red ink. Stop writing like a defendant and start writing like a human being. That sentence did more than therapy had yet managed. The second reflection was different. I miss my car less than I miss the version of myself who never had to be alone with what I was doing. That sentence is ugly, but it's true. By week 3, Mason began supervised service at Rhode Island Hospital's Rehabilitation Support Wing. Not with patients alone. Not at first. He wiped tables in the family waiting area, restocked water cups, pushed empty wheelchairs, filed intake packets, ordinary work, invisible work, work done every day by people he would never have noticed before. One afternoon he saw Gabby. She was back for a follow-up on her wrist. She almost turned and left when she noticed him in hospital khakis and a plain gray volunteer shirt. He froze beside the water dispenser. Neither spoke for several seconds. Then Mason said, "You don't have to talk to me." Gabby looked at the folded stack of towels in his hands. "I wasn't planning to." "Fair." He nodded. "You shouldn't." She studied him. No designer coat, no watch, no audience. Just a tired 18-year-old trying not to look away. Finally she said, "Do you still think this is blown out of proportion?" He answered immediately, "No." "Do you still think people like me come out of nowhere?" That one landed. He swallowed. "No, I think I spent my whole life not looking." Gabby did not smile, but she stayed. "That's closer," she said. Then she walked past him toward radiology. For Mason, that tiny exchange mattered more than any speech. Because it was not absolution. It was the first hint that truth might have a use beyond survival. Before we reveal the twist nobody outside the family saw coming, tell us in the comments whether you think Mason had earned even that much grace yet. At week 5, a new bomb dropped. Garrett Whitmore filed a private motion through separate counsel seeking modification of the vehicle sale condition, arguing the Lamborghini was titled under a family holding company and thus not Mason's disposable asset. In plain English, he wanted to protect the car. When Judge Caprio saw the filing, he scheduled a status hearing. The hearing was short and brutal. Garrett's attorney spoke first. Clean argument, corporate ownership, liquidity concerns, alternative restitution sources available. There were legal contours to it, sure, but everyone in the room heard the moral meaning underneath. Save the car. Write a check. Let the boy keep the symbol. Judge Caprio was having none of it. "Mr. Whitmore," he said to Garrett, "you continue to misunderstand the sentence. The point is not simply paying. The point is parting." Garrett replied, "With respect, Your Honor, symbolism should not override efficiency." Caprio's answer became quote number 9. "When a young man has learned to worship a symbol, removing it is efficiency." The motion was denied. Within 2 weeks, the Lamborghini was sold at consignment. Mason signed the paperwork himself in a sheriff-supervised office. He watched the keys leave his hand. The proceeds cleared a major portion of restitution. For the first time in his life, something he loved left and did not come back because a parent made a call. That same week, another twist emerged. Blake Mercer, facing his own legal exposure, submitted a sworn supplemental statement. In it, he admitted Mason had not been alone in the culture of contempt. Their whole circle treated risk like entertainment. They filmed high-speed pulls on Blackstone, joked about NPC traffic, and shared clips in a private group chat named Asphalt Kings. Several messages were juvenile, arrogant, and disgusting, but one part mattered most. Blake wrote that after the crash, Garrett Whitmore had called Mason not once but 3 times, instructing both boys to keep the narrative narrow and let counsel clean up the rest. The statement did not excuse Mason. It exposed the machine around him. The story went from reckless rich kid to inherited moral failure. That was the unexpected twist around the 7,000 mark of this story. Not that Mason was innocent, that he had been marinating in a family logic that mistook control for care and image for virtue. It made everything worse, and somehow more understandable. At the next counseling session, Dr. Priya Sethi asked Mason a question he could not shake. "If your father taught you that vulnerability is weakness," she said, "why did you cry in court?" Mason stared at the carpet for a long time. "Because for the first time," he answered, "I sounded like someone I wouldn't want to know." That was the beginning of real humility. Not performative shame. Recognition. Week 7 brought the Restorative Justice Conference. Only 3 victims chose to attend: Gabby, Omar, and Doreen Bell. Marisol Pike declined direct participation but submitted questions to be read aloud. The meeting took place in a neutral room at the Community Justice Center. No robes, no bench, just chairs in a circle, a box of tissues, a pitcher of water, and consequences sitting eye to eye. Mason wore a plain navy sweater and cheap black slacks. No jewelry, no cologne cloud, no armor except nerves. Denise Rollins opened the session with ground rules: accountability, respect, no interruption, no demands for forgiveness. Gabby spoke first. "Do you know what made me angriest?" she asked. Mason said no. It wasn't the car. It wasn't even the pain. It was the look on your face when you realized stopping would ruin your night. He shut his eyes briefly. "Yes." Omar asked, "When you said you people, who were you talking about?" Mason did not dodge it. "People I thought I was above." Doreen asked, "Did anyone in your life ever tell you no and mean it?" He almost laughed, but it turned into something sadder. "Not enough." Then Denise read Marisol's first question from Mila. "Why was your car louder than my scream?" No defense lawyer in the world can answer a child's question like that for you. Mason cried openly then, shoulders shaking, no style left in it. "I don't know," he said, "but it shouldn't have been." Gabby's face softened for the first time. Not forgiven. Just human. By the end of the conference, nobody hugged. Nobody smiled for photos. This was not that kind of story. But something real happened. Mason agreed to fund pedestrian safety kits for local scooter commuters through a portion of future trust disbursements he no longer fully controlled. More importantly, he agreed to speak, when cleared, to teenage drivers about entitlement, distraction, and the lie that money can reverse trauma. Judge Caprio reviewed the restorative summary at the 60-day mark and scheduled a compliance hearing for June 18, 2026. This time, there was a line outside the courthouse. The story had spread, not because official cameras had filmed the handcuffs. They had not. It spread because everyone who was there told 10 people, and each of those told 10 more. Judge Caprio made a Lamborghini kid go home in cuffs. "No, you don't get it, the kid actually broke." "No, you really don't get it, the victim asked for mercy." By the time Mason returned, the hearing had become the most talked-about courtroom update in the city. He arrived at 8:52 a.m. in the back seat of a standard county sedan. No engine growl. No sunglasses. No entourage. Just Mason in a charcoal button-down from a department store, carrying a binder of completion records and walking in beside a deputy and his attorney. The difference was so stark that people on the steps literally glanced around to make sure this was the same person. Inside, the gallery was fuller than before. Rose sat in front. Garrett was absent. That absence said a lot. Judge Caprio took the bench and reviewed the compliance file. Restitution payments initiated. Service hours logged 140 of 200. Counseling consistent. No violations. Strong hospital supervisor notes. Reflective essays no longer defensive. One handwritten addendum from Gabby Soto. Another from Denise Rollins. A youth safety workshop proposal pending. Then Caprio looked up. "Mr. Whitmore," he said, You appear thinner." A flicker of embarrassed laughter moved through the room. Mason managed a faint smile. "Bail food, Your Honor." The room broke into the first genuine laughter of the case. Caprio allowed himself half a smile. Humility becomes you better than luxury ever did. Quote number 10. Then he asked, "What have you learned?" Mason did not reach for polished language anymore. That much was obvious. "I learned apology is not a sentence. It's a schedule," he said. "I learned I was never as independent as I thought. I was just insulated. I learned the worst thing about privilege isn't having money. It's having enough distance from consequence that you start treating other people's pain like weather." He paused. "And I learned going home in handcuffs was the first honest ride I'd taken in a long time." The gallery reacted audibly to that. Because it was quotable. Because it was true.